Welcome to This Podcast Is Making Me Thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This episode 119. Today we have two guests. Together they co-wrote the screenplay for Live Free or Die, wrote for The Michael Richards Show and The Martin Short Show. And of course, they were credited with writing a combined 12 episodes of Seinfeld from seasons 5 through season 8. Please welcome Andy Robin and Gregg Kavet. Andy, Greg, thanks for joining.
Nice to be here. Thanks,
Andy and Greg. This is a treat for us. So take us back. I'll start with Andy, because you were the first to come to Seinfeld. Tell us a little bit about how that opportunity. I know you started with the Junior Mint, but how did you get on the writing staff back in '93?
I had written for Saturday Night Live for a season, and when Jerry Seinfeld hosted, I asked Adam Sandler if he could pass Jerry a script I had written. And Jerry had brought along Larry Charles and Larry David when he was on SNL, and they read it and liked it enough to have me pitch some ideas. So one of those ideas eventually became the Junior Mint, and spent a year on Seinfeld by myself, realized it was a lot more fun writing with Greg, asked Greg if he would want to work together again, because we had written a lot in college, and I just think Greg's the funniest person, and I wanted to have somebody to laugh with and not be alone in the room. Greg had launched his own company, but he was willing to try to extricate himself from that, and we did we started writing together in, I think, '94.
Wow, that's great. So Greg, what was that like? You get the call from Andy. I guess that was around season 5 of Seinfeld. It was, Thursday nights.
We had talked a little bit during the Junior Mint, just kind of briefly. And the following season, I was running this company. I was working pretty hard already. And he came up with this kind of idea. He's like, what if we wrote together? I'm like, look, I can't leave. I can't be out there. But we ended up getting the world's worst data connection, basically between LA and Boston, where I was. And we would try to be writing on the same computer at the same time. And I mean, it crashed honestly every 10 minutes. I still am paranoid about saving my stuff as often as possible, because we just lost endless amounts of material because this stupid internet, it wasn't even internet. I don't know what the hell it was. Some data line would crash back then. But it allowed us to write together, and we came up with enough stuff that eventually, Andy went in, pitched the Jimmy as separate ideas. And once they kind of went ahead with that, we wrote that up. And then I flew out for casting and for shooting that episode. It was my first one that I was actually on set.
Awesome. One of our favorites. And we actually, Anthony Stark was our first
cool.
guest who was on the show. Yeah. He was great. He was so good. So let's do that. Maybe we'll jump into the Jimmy. So we've talked to several writers and kind of got a feel for, it sounds like Larry and Jerry wanted real life stories a lot. It sounds like you would pitch them ideas. If they liked it, they tell you to run with it. You'd go back and write the script, hand it to them. They would then sort of do their thing to it. How did that work? Is that similar to how it worked for you guys? Let's just stick with the Jimmy, I guess. Curious, where those stories come from. We were talking earlier about Watley and the Penthouse magazines and the strength footwear. Well, Howard definitely used those strength. Chris used those strength footwear shoes. I remember. Just kind of an idea of who did you meet someone who talked in the third person? Where did some of these stories come from? We're always interested in.
The third person was, I think, something we always joked about. Ricky Henderson, Wade Boggs certainly always did, and I think particularly with Wade Boggs, we were, Red Sox fans, and it always seemed like such a natural story in terms of that. The shoes, I think, were originally my dad had some catalog with those strength shoes, and I don't remember if I brought them up or we had talked about them before, but we actually even tested them out. We wanted to see what the reaction would be. So I put them on, and we went to the New England Aquarium, and they let me in for free because they thought I was mentally challenged. I mean, we're like, all right, I think this actually works because these look pretty stupid. I don't know. What were the other stories in that one?
I'm trying to remember the order in which the stories kind of came together. At some point we wanted Kramer to be mistaken for a mentally challenged person.
I feel like that was the last one. George probably started it, right? Because George always started it. We always had an easier time with George.
I don't even. George is trying to sell the shoes. What else was going on with George?
Was that the sweaty one, or is that a different?
No,
one? What was he doing?
Well, no, he was sweating, from the gym. Yeah.
But
you're right. It was the sweating episode.
So he was sweating. So that one originally, the George story was him sweating, the shower, right? The shower's not taking. That's that episode.
Yeah, exactly.
And so originally that was a bigger story.
Psychotics take cold showers. Yeah.
Yeah, and and it was working towards him being accused of lying,
stealing,
with the missing equipment and being sweating and looking like he was guilty. I believe that was the first story actually that we.
And did you guys come up with the name Jimmy? Like it's kind of perfect, like. And did you have someone in mind? Anthony Stark obviously was remarkable, but did you have
maybe like we heard Jimmy? A lot of rock and roll stars talk about themselves in the third person. Maybe it was a Jimmy Buffett thing. My father-in-law's name is Jimmy. Maybe that was it. It just felt like it fit the personality somehow.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's the right name. And Anthony Stark, we didn't have him in mind ahead of time, but I remember right when he came in, he was great. Like he was one of those guys that came into casting and just, like, oh yeah, that's.
He was kind of youngish. Yeah. Maybe a little too young, but it kind of made it funnier.
Yeah.
Like Elaine, ends up with him.
So Andy, Greg, you both mentioned that you were kind of talking during the Junior Mint, and that's an incredible story that you passed something to Sandler. And for my money, I'll never forget that history class with Jerry, Farley, Chris Rock. I mean, on SNL,
incredible.
For me, one of the best scenes ever. I mean, pound for pound, the comedy in that room was unbelievable. So you're writing the Junior Mint, and we've read that you didn't think it was a great episode. You didn't think Larry would like it. Tell us a little bit about that. I'm assuming you bounced these ideas off Greg across the country, but tell us a little bit about the Junior Mint. And
like a lot of comedy writers, in my life, I've had a tendency to be a little bit of a neurotic and occasionally kind of get panicky. And I suddenly realized at one point that operating rooms, no operating room is going to allow somebody to chuck something. If they're going to invite people in, they're not going to be able to throw things. I was just concerned there's going to be some kind of barrier. It just seemed really far-fetched. And I suddenly thought, I'm killing this show that I love. This is the stupidest episode ever. But nobody cared. So that was one point of panic. Another point of panic was the George buying the dead artists, the dying artist's art story. Friend of ours, actually, Greg is friends with him too. John Abel and Glenn Berger. At one point in the process, told me that the Golden Girls, which is a show I've never seen, had a similar episode. And I thought, oh crap! That's it. I guess I can't do
the Golden Girls. I'm done.
And I told Larry, my friend said the Golden Girls did this, and he said, yeah, nobody cares. So I don't, nobody's ever mentioned it to me since. So either they were mistaken or it was sort of a very slim connection. But that was another big point of panic. And then this third point of panic, which Greg can vouch for, is when you get the first cut of a show, when they slap it, before you've done a lot of editing as a group and before it's sweetened and the sound and music are in place, it's so depressing. It doesn't look like a show. And
you look super amateurish, and you're embarrassed that you're associated with this. I mean, every time, no matter how many times you've seen it, you're like, oh shit, this one is terrible. This is the one.
We finally created something that is unwatchable, is not fixable. So I got an excited call from this agent at William Morris. Andy, we have a rough cut of the show. We got a cut. You can come watch it. And I didn't know anything about producing TV shows. So I went and sat in a dark room by myself and watched this episode that was abysmal, and just was so depressed until it aired. And it was So those moments have happened where you suddenly just lose any confidence in what you've done.
Yeah, there's a lot of in the process. I mean, maybe you guys have heard it from other people. There's a ton of like ups and downs that you wouldn't necessarily expect, like a good table read is amazing. And you're like, oh, this thing's nailed. but there's a lot of work after the table read. And if that stuff doesn't go well, it's a crap episode. And, you kind of have the highs of that and the lows of seeing that first edit. And it's just a lot of back and forth that way.
Yeah. And something to touch on there, and it has to do with both your guys' points and that episode is the Mulva. So we've heard several stories on this, and maybe we can finally clear this up for our fans. So originally was the name going to rhyme with a car? Does that sound anything familiar to you guys at all, Andy? Were you thinking of naming?
No, no, I would know that, and at no point was it going to rhyme with a car.
Okay, so we got that out of the way. That was one thing that we had heard from somebody at some point in time. The other thing we hered was
Mulva told us that.
Yeah, well, Mulva herself told us that, but that's for another time.
I'm not sure where she's getting that from, but maybe she knows something I don't know.
No, that's fair. And then the other thing is Ann Tolman, who we had on, who was Michael Richards' girlfriend for a little while, was on set for the taping of that. And she mentioned that the name came from the audience. Like there was different names you guys were batting around, and you weren't settled yet.
It was originally going to end. Larry Charles, I think, because I wasn't there at the time, I think he came up with the rhymes with the female body part thing.
Okay.
And it was going to end with never knowing what it was. And somebody from the audience suggested Dolores, and they went with it.
Okay.
It worked well.
That checks out with the story we heard. That checks out. Awesome. Glad we cleared that up. No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, so the Jimmy was the first one that you guys wrote as a team. Technically got combined as a team. And that was season 6. Then we move on to season 7, and you guys start really cranking them out together. The first one there is the Hot Tub, which is just packed with some classics with Jean Paul, Why Separate Knobs, the whole you bastard, you sons of bitches. Kramer with the Hot Tub. Maybe you guys can let us know. The Hot Tub's definitely up there as a favorite for many fans. You guys remember putting that one together?
Yeah, Greg, what do you recall of where those stories came from?
I know I think very early on we had the marathon ending with the, basically throwing something over his head, because that was something my brother did at the Boston Marathon. Like we were handing out Gatorade, and we had a guy who came running by, grabbed it, thought it was water, threw it over his head, and then was like, "Fuck you!" to all of us standing there who felt really terrible. So I felt like that was maybe the earliest part of that storyline, at least. The Jean Paul, I think the actual missing the Olympics, Larry came up with, or Larry had heard about and wanted us to go with, I remember. Like, maybe it wasn't originally, maybe, I don't remember where
somebody who
originally marathon, but it was some Olympic person who had slept through their meet. I think came from Larry.
And the George stuff was him looking annoyed.
Yeah, that was Andy. That was like a guy you worked for, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, the George stuff in that one was the sons of bitches and the.
Well, it was also that.
Bastards. Yeah, that too.
What's that?
It was also sons of bitches, but it was originally George looking annoyed to not get.
I worked at the Stamford, Connecticut Parks and Recreations Department one summer, and the guy who ran the department rarely showed up for work, but when he was there, really wanted to convince you he was working hard, and so he was always irritable and lifting up the pile of paperwork on his desk. And you believe this crap, Andy? Doesn't end, never ends. So I think that resonated with me and Greg. We've always, looked for little tricks to try to lighten our load. And people who are horsing around and smiling all the time don't necessarily look like hard workers. If you look a little more frustrated or intense, it tends to give others the impression that you're working hard.
Yeah, and that lends itself to George incredibly. We talked to Peter Melman, and he actually said the easiest character that he wrote for was Elaine. I'm curious where kind of the big four kind of ranked with you guys.
George was definitely the easiest for us. We ended the show with probably another 20 George stories. I mean, honestly, we just had piles of them.
Do you remember any of them?
No.
I remember.
Do you remember any that you pitched that, yeah, exactly. That you pitched.
Oh, yeah. Well, go ahead.
George going, visiting needing to use the bathroom and pretending he was interested in taking a tour at an open house at with a realtor, and the plumbing hadn't been hooked up. And then George has to give a presentation working on some charitable effort of the Yankees, has to give a presentation to the players' wives. And he's sitting down and gets an erection with these wives all being kind of affectionate and attractive, and can't stand up to give the presentation and has to make an excuse why he can't get up to use the blackboard.
That's a great one.
Whatever. And then what was the other? We had a couple others. No.
But George clearly was easiest for you.
Yeah,
you guys wrote
both
George
had a
so
lot
well.
of work, weird stuff. I think we just liked, watching people at work doing George kind of scammy things.
Right.
I think we're both like Honeymooners fans. It's kind of like, it felt like that kind of charactered us a little bit, just looking for some little edge going on with George. Something a little underhanded all the time.
Yeah, I mean,
you
guys wrote George so well. I mean, it starts with really your first episode, Andy, the barber with Penske File. I mean, that's when we think George, we think Penske File. I mean, that's George in a nutshell, right? I mean, that's something that's going to be quoted, forever. Just Penske material and that whole thing. I mean, was that something that happened in real life?
That is not only based in real life, but it's based on my first encounter with Larry and Jerry when I was pitching the Junior Mint. I went in really nervous. I was such a big fan. It was the first sitcom I was trying to write for. Went through the beats of the story with them, and afterwards Larry said, well, good job. I want you to write this script. And I went away thinking, all right, well, I got Larry in my corner, so that's good. That's a good sign. And I figured, Larry had to talk to the network and his producer team. And so I just sort of patiently waited. And like a week later, I get a frantic call from my agent. Why didn't you tell me you got the script? I said, I didn't get the script. He said, Larry said, they said you got the script. I said, no, Larry wants me to do it. He said, that means you got the script. So I told Larry that story, thinking it might be a funny story for George. And he added the little, so Penske or whatever the guy's name is says, I want you to have this job, of course. And then it takes, just to really hit it home.
I mean, for my money, the 3 seconds, a ta-ta total. I mean, I can't not laugh at that. And you have a bunch of these throughout your episodes.
Yeah.
So we're mentioning Larry a lot, and you guys have a kind of unique position. You wrote while Larry was there, and you wrote when Larry wasn't there. So, we've heard from a lot of writers, they submit the script and then Larry kind of just tears it apart. He changes everything. Did that happen a lot with you in seasons 6, 7? And I'm curious how that did you get more control in those later years?
Well, it felt really script dependent, which was pretty nice. Like when you turn in a script, at least in 6 and 7, if it worked at the table read, if it worked at the first kind of run through, not a lot changed. It like I remember there was one scene that connected to a previous episode that was added, kind of about him being gay, which we didn't know because we hadn't seen that episode yet. But other than that, it was pretty close. Obviously there's a few like tweaks here and there, but that story was kind of working. The whole script was working, and it stayed very close to what we had. And other ones you'd come in with and they really needed some work, and Larry and Jerry would go off and do whatever needed to be done, and sometimes that was a really heavy rewrite, and sometimes it was a few scenes, but it gave it the ability where I feel like, particularly for those earlier seasons, you can watch it and pretty much know who wrote it. It's like, oh, that feels like Melman. That feels like, whoever did that one, there's enough of that tone that remains. And certainly in 8 and 9, I think it was, it was more of like a mini group, and it lost a little bit of that really individual script feel.
Interesting that you brought that. I mean, I think that's discernible to some fans. I mean, what you just mentioned is interesting. That's that you saw from the inside and can kind of explain what we've seen from kind of the outside, if that makes sense. Like the reason behind why it looks different to us. But some people love those late seasons and some good gems in there. It's just like you said, it's a different tone. Well, going through all your episodes, we talked about the big four. You just mentioned George was really the one you guys really grasped onto, but you guys wrote a lot of guest stars, and some you like to repeat. I mean, you got Watley in there a few times, obviously Newman, Peterman with the bottle deposits, the parents. You're bringing in Morty in a lot of these. You got Frank Costanza in the fatigue. I mean, you guys love the guest stars too as well, and we love the guest stars. I mean, the Jimmy, there's one-off guest stars, and then there's ones you bring back, and Sue Ellen Mishke you bring back a couple of times. I mean, maybe you guys could just touch on, when you're writing those stories, you got George, it sounds like you're really kind of anchoring with George, but you're bringing in these guest stars and these secondary roles that just shine. Like, how are you bringing up those stories in your head? Like, how are you tying them all together? And like, what's your thought process for bringing some of them in, and kind of just touch on your favorites around those guest stars that I kind of just mentioned?
I mean, of the recurring, we loved Frank. I mean, I would say that was probably our favorite of the, non-four, but in the show a lot, and we loved writing for him. I think he loved our stuff. Like, we had a really good thing going. I think the Fatigues was probably like the peak of that, but he was terrific. I mean, he just did a phenomenal job. There was something about his nature that I think appealed to both of us as like, some sort of uncle or grandparent, or, just a funny way, like, the way he'd look up to the sky and try to remember his lines, and the way he'd spit stuff out, and his anger and his brusqueness, everything about that worked for us. And we really, especially once we had used him a couple times, we're like always like, oh yeah, it would be great to have Frank in this thing.
I think we had Jackie Childs in a couple. We liked him too.
Yeah, he was great.
Yeah. We did, that character had already been created, but we really responded to that. And he I think he was in 2 episodes of ours.
Yeah, and he was in he was in the episode where it was OJ. It was the OJ trial,
the caddy,
right?
He was there.
And
the caddy.
You used him as he was meant to be used, right? He was Cochran, and you guys were like, "Well, let's make him Cochran." The whole thing was going on with OJ at the time, and I mean, that was just like perfect.
Yeah,
perfect.
And was he in the one with Brenda Strong? Kramer wanted a lawsuit because she was topless. She was.
Yeah, that was the cat.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the caddy. Yeah. That's the one where.
Yeah, the browless wonder.
OJ.
Which one of you came up with the browless wonder? We're very happy about it, but
I know that one was definitely partially from Larry and Jerry. They were obsessed with the OJ case, and they certainly suggested. I don't remember when it got exactly to the bra thing. Do you remember that?
I think my spouse Anna was. I remember being with her, and she was irritated about some woman's attire. I think that maybe where it came from. We worked for Castle Rock after the show, and we really wanted to do a series based around Jackie Childs. That almost happened. That would have been a juicy sitcom. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, because we have stories coming every time with a new lawsuit. That's
We had Jackie on. So back to the caddy. So Greg, you're from Massachusetts, clearly.
Yeah.
Andy, did you say you're from Connecticut or?
Yeah, Connecticut.
So, I mean, we'd be remiss. One of our favorite lines of all time in the caddy was obviously the Jay Buhner line.
One of my favorite lines of all time. It blows my mind every day that was on the Jay Buhner line.
Yeah, watching that live as a Yankee fan growing up, like, wow. I mean, you guys hit it. Like, so who came up with that one?
That was definitely Larry. Unfortunately, yeah, definitely Larry. It was. We had a lot of baseball stuff, but that one was definitely a Larry line.
That sounds like, yeah. I mean, when I heard that live as a kid, it was on TV.
Yeah, I was insane. It's way up there for me as well. It's like it's just everything about it, the way he's spitting it out. It's really funny. But I think we were less. I feel like we were less familiar with the Yankees, so it was a little harder to get like a Jay Buhner level joke in there than for Larry, perhaps.
Yeah. The one episode we didn't touch on from season 7 is an hour-long episode, The Bottle Deposit. Curious how that comes about. You guys writing it, and you're like, I can't fit this in, and they're like, we'll give you just the fact that it's an hour is pretty cool, because there aren't many of them that weren't like, maybe like, the pilot or something like that, where you kind of need the hour to tell the story. So that was pretty cool how The Bottle Deposit, had that. That's when you bring back Sue Ellen Mishke as well. And one of our favorite lines, speaking of favorite lines, the washer fluid's not fine, but Brad Garrett, the mechanic. I mean, we crack every time that line's said, we crack up. Maybe just tell. I mean, that Bottle Deposit is just packed. It's just packed with.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting one for us. I think for me, it's a little bit of a disappointment. I felt like it was maybe the best table read we ever did. It came in at the table read. It was crazy strong. I mean, just like everything was working, and we were shooting it, and it was super long. And these shows were always long, but this one was to the point where we're like, I don't think we can cut this and have it still make sense and fit into whatever our 22 and a half minutes or whatever it was. And so at some point we decided to go for an hour, and it kind of felt like it went the other way. Like to me, it feels really padded out. Like it just doesn't, it was so meaty as a half hour, and as an hour, it felt stretched and kind of thin and not as fun as it was at the table.
It would have been a great 45-minute episode.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because you guys said on other episodes they cut a lot, right? But this one, they didn't.
No, it was so much to cut. You get to a point, you have 4 stories, and there are times like the one we talked about in the Jimmy, where Georgia's story is pretty much gone. Like you don't know that the sweating has anything to do with anything. But sometimes they interlock in such a complicated manner that you're like, crap, I don't think we can cut enough to make it fit and have it still make sense. And it felt that way. And so we decided to go for an hour, which, I don't think helped it.
And I feel like
the pace of the show, I mean, you guys must sense that those early shows are so nicely spaced. They have a totally different feel.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then as each character started to get their own story, and, every character is beloved, and you want to make good use of these brilliant actors. So it just grows and grows, and editing just got harder and harder over time, cutting it down. And then like in the final year, when they started editing for syndication, that was brutal, because you had to take another like 2 or 3 minutes out to be able to run it syndicated. I don't know if those are if those like tight syndication cuts are what are being used on Netflix now. I would guess they are, but they're you're definitely cutting some bone that last pass.
Yeah, I mean, there's even, I think it was the fatigues. Like we made a special request to the network that it was longer the first time we aired it. Like we got an extra minute or something, because we felt like it's really going to lose stuff if you cut this. And so they ran it slightly long for some reason that first time.
Yeah. Network TV, right? Beholden to the 21 minutes.
Yeah.
What it's, and Andy, you mentioned, it's kind of just the feel of the show. Like we can feel it. We tend to like the early years. Tom Sharonis as a director, and maybe we're overthinking this, but was there a difference between Sharonis and Ackerman, and how he worked with some of the characters? Like you said, a table read seemed great, but then once you get out there, things kind of change, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what drives the change most is if you're just really long, like we were with Bottle Deposit. Usually if the table reads strong, you just leave it alone. I thought, I enjoyed working with Sharonis and Ackerman. I'm not sure. I think the feel of the show probably changed the most just because it was not so scrutinized early on. They could be a little, it's really different. It just doesn't feel like a sitcom for the first couple of seasons.
Yeah.
And that was such a nice thing, to be under the radar and to develop these characters slowly and keep it, a little more realistic, a little based in real life stories than a typical show. That helped set the tone so that they could continue a lot of those things later on. But I think the big drive that made the tone feel different was just more stories and more individual stories for each character. Characters weren't sharing stories; they each had their own thing going on.
Yeah, and it got a bit more outlandish too as they were building those stories and making them a little bit crazier and crazier. Like you said, probably because there was a lot of eyes on it and a lot more attention, and let's make it bigger and better. It just seemed like it became more for the masses, and the numbers show that. I mean, the ratings obviously were through the roof there in those later seasons. But
yeah, well, all the writers were clearing out our memory banks of anything funny that ever happened to us, and eventually you just have to invent stuff.
Right.
Right. Yeah, you do lose a little realism. I mean, particularly I feel like in the later episodes in any given year are the more desperate ones. And I think it shows a little bit. It's like those last 9 are really hard to come up with, and you're kind of reaching for anything. And occasionally you get something that, some spare story that's lying around that's great. But a lot of times you're kind of stretching it a little bit, and you need that summer to refresh and get something that's kind of more naturally funny.
Yeah, and that's interesting too. I mean, to that point, how much input is Larry and Jerry giving you for like the arc of a season, or like anything along the lines of, hey, bring back this so we can talk about this in this episode down here? Or do they give you guys that kind of direction? Almost none. Okay.
Almost none. I would say I don't know. Maybe it varied season by season, and most of my time was 7. But the arc was pretty much all Larry and Jerry. They had the engagement thing going, but beyond that, it felt like you were looking for the funniest ideas that were ready to go, and it had nothing to do with any arc. Like there was zero arc going on. We were just trying to hit it out of the park every time. And at most, like we said with the Jimmy, there'd be like one scene tucked in that would kind of tie it back to something, but there wasn't really a lot of thought given to the arc.
And did you guys, because you guys were a team, I'm just curious, like how did that work? Like just you two went off in a corner and kind of spitballed ideas or went out for a beer or whatever, what have you, and there were kind of like different pockets of that going on? Or did you collaborate? I know you were producers and story editors on a bunch, but...
And it varied after Larry left, but we would certainly talk to other people about their ideas. You'd bounce them off other writers. But in terms of actually breaking it and writing, yeah, it was pretty much the team or an individual would go off and do their stuff, and maybe come in with I need a little help with the scene, or I need a little, any ideas here. But I'd say 90% of it was either the two of us, or if it was an individual, just the individual going off and writing. And you kind of disappear. Part of the challenge with producing in those last 2 years when Larry was gone was if you're on the floor, it was really tough to be working on your own episode. And so, there was a little bit of there's only a certain number of episodes that we can be on the floor and help out with, because we also got to go back and work on the episodes that are coming up next week, kind of thing going on.
Yeah, I can see that. And from what we heard, in the absence of Larry, Mandelberg and Schaefer maybe either attempted to or maybe quasi kind of filled in a little bit of that role to help Jerry out as far as
I listened to a bit of the Dan's thing, and that was kind of the way he said it. I think for him it was that way. In my view, it was more like we kind of split the whole thing into 2 teams, and they probably took 60%, and we plus Melman when he was still there, and Spike probably had about 40%. But it wasn't so much that it was this versus that. It was just when, whoever had written that episode, whoever had helped punch up that episode kind of needed to be on the floor to guide it through. And so the remaining people were working on the next one. So it was a little bit, I felt like it was more of a split than Dan was indicating, but certainly, certainly they had a big impact on what was going on. And there were, particularly in season 9, Jeff and Alec were EPing it. So they certainly came in and edited some that were, I would consider, more on our team's side, but it felt more of a split to me.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because it's like we mentioned. We don't want to harp on it too much, but it's definitely it's noticeable that there's a difference between the tone of the show, obviously from before Larry and after Larry, even before Larry Charles left too. And how I mentioned Sharonis, there's almost these 3 different parts of the show that all is Seinfeld, but they're all just a little bit different in their own way. Mm-hmm. And that season 9 season, it shows that there's not that driving vision of Larry that's kind of running through that this is my story, because seasons, the other seasons, Larry's kind of, the driver, if you will, showrunner. So it is interesting that's noticeable from a writing standpoint too. The one of the other episodes I just wanted to touch on too that we didn't on specifics is the comeback. That's a crowd favorite. The jerk store called,
Jerk
the whole
store was great. I mean, that was actually, I'd say, a really successful team effort. It was we had a story that wasn't working and it got pulled. And Melman had that comeback story kind of sitting around, which I think for us felt like just a classic, like early season, great, like almost one of those like essence of Seinfeld stories. And so felt pretty grateful that he kind of like granted that one to us. And then on top of that, it was one of those room punch-ups that was just good. I mean, the jerk store line itself was Alec Berg, and he threw it out as like a bad example of what we're looking for, and then it ended up being like, no, that's what we're going to stick with. It was like it just was really funny, and a lot of the references in that scene are about the writing process. It's all like it's the arguing over the joke and going back and forth, and it's you collaborate and it gets all watered down and that kind of stuff. And I just kind of thought it was a real fun storyline that way.
And of course, Milos. We gotta love Milos.
Yeah, Milos was great. That was another real story. It was like a guy selling ski boots who told my brother, and I was there as well, that he skied in them. And then I happened to run into that guy at a totally different mountain. He was terrible. Like, we're like, that's
a great move.
The pro is awful.
And your most critically acclaimed episode was the Fatigues, right? You guys won a Writers Guild. Are you most proud of that one because of the award, or?
Not really. We liked the writing a lot. I do feel like that one was, I don't know how they do the Writers Guild Award if it's off the script, but it was one of those ones where the editing was tough and felt like the script was probably a little better than the episode, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because as it got tightened up, it got really tight. But yeah, the Frank stuff in there is pretty special. I love the Frank stuff. And the episode as a whole has a lot of stuff that works together, but I don't know if the award alone puts it above something like the Jimmy for me.
Yeah. Oh, so the Jimmy is your favorite?
I'd say probably, yeah. Partially it was also the first one I was on set for. So for me, it was like, it's this thing I watch on TV, and now I'm here, and this is all going on. It was pretty special experience. It was a little hard to top that.
Yeah, that's something that we kind of want to hear a little bit about. It just sounds like it's a dream job, right? You guys are all smart, all funny, just pitching ideas, right? And I know obviously a lot of work. You guys working long hours. I'm not downplaying that, but we kind of want to hear the fun stories. Maybe we've heard a couple of them. Andy, I think Dan mentioned to us. Dan O'Keefe mentioned some milk challenge, perhaps. I don't know. It sounds like you guys had a lot of fun. We're just curious. Maybe you guys could touch on what that's like, in the downtime, or just
there were some very high highs. A lot of fun. Good lunch conversations. And then when we were punching stuff up together, I could laugh. Hardest I've ever laughed. Really fun. But a lot of pressure too, because, we not only writing for the show, but loved the show. There was nothing mercenary about the job. We really wanted it to be just great, and had seen so many good episodes that's a lot of pressure. So, when you're running out of stories, and then when you're feeling the pressure, it doesn't help your creativity. So you can, hit dry spells. But I'm losing track of the question. What were you asking?
Kind of wanted some specifics on that. If you had any funny stories.
Oh yeah, you brought up the milk thing.
Yeah, the milk
right.
Milk challenge. Anything you got that?
I think Alec Berg mentioned that you couldn't drink a gallon of milk in an hour, and I was a big milk drinker, and I thought I could do it. So, and he said, no, you can't take any lactate or anything beforehand. So it was just a pure gallon of milk. And I think that's like, what would you say, Greg? 9 glasses? Were you there?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was about 8 or 9.
And I think I got to like 7.5. Right?
Yeah, he got very close, and then it turns out that last one's really tough.
That is impressive.
Stomach reacts in its own way.
Yeah, and then you go from I can do this at like 5 glasses to this is not. There's no way I can do this at glass number 6. And I didn't realize how quickly you puke. Like I didn't quite make it where I needed to go. And then I had to pay because I lost the bet. So it was the double kick in the butt.
Double whammy. So you talked about, I mean, we've talked to so many guest stars, and I think the beauty of this show is letting the guest stars shine and kind of the unselfishness of the main 4. And I think you guys can attest to that. But so like the Sue Ellen Mishkis of the world, Jackie Childs. So how'd that work? Did you write with them in mind, or did you write the idea and then you know, it thought it'd be a good idea to pull back in these characters? Like, did you work with Mark Hirschfeld? Like, I'm just curious kind of how that whole process went in like bringing characters back.
Bring them back. I mean, if we're bringing them back, we're writing with them in mind generally. I don't think on any of the guest stars that I can remember with somebody in mind, an actor in mind when we wrote it the first time. And Mark could bring people who ended up being great. But yeah, when you're coming back, you're like, you know, we really enjoyed working with this person, and you know, this would be a funny idea, a funny spin-off kind of idea for them.
What are some of your guys's you know, favorite episodes that maybe, you know, you didn't get credit for, like you didn't write, but you watched from afar, or maybe you threw a line? We've heard that, you know, you guys are all kind of, like you said, punching up scripts and things like that. Like, what's something that maybe you got into someone else's episode? That
I think there was an episode of Peter Melman's, I think it was Peter's, where Watley converts to Judaism, or it was
yada yada.
Yeah, yada yada. I think Greg and I had a big hand in that, and I remember feeling like that came out really well, and that was a good collaboration.
You anti-dentite bastard. Maybe that was one of your lines.
Yeah, I think fluoride was.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah, I mean, that's like, I mean, we've had, you know, multiple. Go ahead.
Came up just because I watched it recently. I was watching the Dealership, which was I think a Steve Corrin episode. And I remember really laughing about the candy stuff going on. Like when they were all arguing about the random candy bars, it feels very like out of nowhere. It's very specific, and just, I don't know, I still found it really funny. Just talking about, you know, which ones have caramel, and it's the only candy with the cookie crunch and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your favorite episodes?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, we lean towards, you know, top 5 anywhere from the limo to the phone message to the red dot to the contest. I'm probably missing a couple here.
Yeah, Ultimate Sci, Marine Biologist, Hamptons, Bubble Boy, the Jimmy, of course.
But the Jimmy, the Junior Mint, the hot tub for sure.
Up there for sure.
There was I think it's season 3, the Keith Hernandez episode of season 3, right?
Oh, yeah.
The boyfriend's
like
up there.
That season just doesn't have a lot of lulls. It was just so
like
good.
9 in a row or 12 in a row.
You're talking our language. Yeah.
I think the Hernandez episode, I say this a lot, is like a launch pad for the show. It just kind of took it to another level. And then, you know, 4 or 5, forget about it. 6, the Jimmy. I mean, so when you guys, like, you were young guys at the time. Like how Andy, how old were you when you did SNL, you're a young guy, and then you hopped on Seinfeld?
I think I was 25 when I came on. 20. I think the Junior Mint, 92. I was 24. And I was also the only married guy there. It was just kind of a weird dynamic.
Really? Not that there's anything wrong with it.
Would you guys go to Harvard together? That's how you met in college? Is that right? Or
yeah, we were across the hall from each other freshman year, and kind of immediately hit it off on, I don't know, jokes, and we did a lot of pranks there, and had a lot of fun, and then ended up going on Lampoon and writing parodies for Lampoon. So we had kind of a pretty long track record of working together, and had really, really similar senses of humor. I mean, I mean, having talked to a ton of people even since then and kind of gone over jokes, it was remarkably close sense of humor.
Wow. And what was your guys like, like Tony and I went to high school and everything together. And we watched Seinfeld. Like, what were you and Andy watching Cheers? Like, what was kind of
our touchstones? We were both big Caddyshack fans.
Okay. All right.
Caddyshack and Animal House and the Zucker films. I think, Greg, were you a Mad Magazine person?
Not as much as you. I mean, I liked it, but I wasn't I didn't have a ton of them. It was like my mom would always go to the store and she'd come back with Cracked or Crazy, and I was
well, speaking of magazines, since you brought it up, Eddie, the whole Penthouse thing and the Elle Macpherson Playboy.
You bring it back in the Nap with the Playboy. You got the Penthouse and
that came out of nowhere. That was like an invented story that just worked really well.
Which one?
The Penthouse in the dentist's office.
Tim Wally, yeah,
and boy, he was so good in that.
That's one we didn't touch on. The Nap.
He just spaced a fill, and it just fell into place.
The one we didn't touch on.
Yeah, I wonder what the order was, because then the Novocaine helped sell Kramer his challenge.
Yeah. What a perfect episode! Like everything, everything worked
together.
Well, our whiteboards, Greg and I would put, as the story came to us, and we'd find our first story. We knew we'd want to do this story. It might be person talks in the third person and Elaine thinks she's making a date with somebody who's not in the room. I think that was the first story. And you put that on your whiteboard, and then like some math problem, the whiteboard would just get messier and messier and filled with arrows connecting to this story, and we would just sit and stare at the whiteboard for hours until you find some connection between the stories. So when the stories worked well, it was just a lot of thinking and diagramming.
Yeah.
And so you were on for 2 episodes, Andy, and then you brought Greg in. Greg, did you have to interview with Larry? What to get on set?
No, actually, by the time we went in for the Jimmy, we were pitching it as a script. Andy wasn't on staff, and we were coming in as these are ideas that we like, and if you like them, maybe we can do a show together.
The Barber was heavily rewritten. The Barber, I think, was very disappointing to Larry, and so I didn't get asked back. And I was in the Martin Short Show for a year.
Really?
And I was also kind of disaffected. I wasn't having the best time. It wasn't there wasn't the camaraderie and nurturing that I thought there might be. It was
you needed Greg.
Intense atmosphere. What's that?
You needed Greg.
Yeah, I needed Greg.
So, and I also didn't realize how good I had it at Seinfeld after spending a year on the Martin Short Show, which had its own struggles. I realized, boy, I really missed those goofy Seinfeld characters, and so I knew if I was writing with Greg, I could recapture the enthusiasm. So, and it would be fun and we'd be good. So we started. I said, Greg, if we put together an outline, I'm sure it's going to be good, and I'll just go pitch it. I'll go back to Larry and Jerry and pitch it, and they'll like it, and we'll do it. And that's exactly what happened.
That's incredible. It's your guys' friendship. You guys are still talking today, like you said. And two episodes, 2 scenes come to mind about friendship that are part of your guys' episodes that I just love. Because everyone was talking about how selfish these characters are, and in the finale they get what's coming to them and all this stuff. But you guys wrote in the episode where Jerry goes out of his way to go to Yankee Stadium and take the things off the car, right? That I just love that. George is, I'll do it myself. I don't care. Jerry's like, all right, he still does it. But where does it end? He does it for his friend, and the one, and an even bigger one to me is Kramer, siding with Jerry when he's in the bottle deposit. Do I go left? Do I go right? Newman's like, keep going. And he's like, no, he sticks with Jerry when push comes to shove, and even kicks Newman out of the truck. Got the fat man out. We're running lean. I love those 2, scenes, because it just shows their friendship. And, your guys' friendship is probably on the pages there, I'm guessing, but just wanted to say that. I don't know if it's a question there, but love the friendship.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kramer had a lot of heart. Not always the most reliable, but easily distracted guy and just kind of quirky. But could be very loyal. Very loyal.
Yeah, and you guys put a lot of heart into everything you did, so we can't thank you enough. Your work on Seinfeld. What can we say? Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having
us.
Yeah. Cat and Robin, right? What's better than that?
Well, thanks for having the podcast. I'm psyched you guys are doing it, and thanks for helping keep the fire burning.
Of course. All the best, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. See you guys.